Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. Hey everyone, I'm Mark Moyer, author of Win Again, speaker, career coach, and business advisor. And I help athletes, executives, and entrepreneurs reach their fullest potential. What you're going to be hearing in every single episode are conversations with athletes and other sports-related influencers. And we'll be offering you the insight that you need to succeed in life, including advice that will let you jump past your competition, whether it be for a great new job or taking your business to a much, much higher level. Make sure to connect with me on social media at Mark Moyer Coach and go to my website, markmoyer.com, to get access to the tips and strategies that my coaching clients get directly. If you're looking for ways to make your mark, send me an email to mark@markmoyer.com and I'll get you going right away. Thanks for joining me today. It's going to be an awesome episode. Now, are you ready to make your mark? Let's do this. Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. My name is Mark Moyer and I'm broadcasting to you live from New York City. Super excited to have you on board wherever you're listening. If it's here in New York, somewhere else in the United States, or on this great planet, thanks for being here. And I'm super excited. I just had a great conversation with Russ Wilde. And Russ is the COO of Front Office Sports. And, this is an entity, a media company that ties together sports and business in a great way. I mean, I love reading their newsletter every morning. Superb content. You'll really get so much out of it. And, quite frankly, this is a great episode, a great content, and really we jump into so much sports-related stuff. You're going to love this episode. But before you dive in, make sure you hit subscribe wherever it is on your screen. Subscribe to iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, wherever you're listening to this, Spotify, just hit subscribe. And if you want access to any of the prior episodes, they're all on my website, markmoyer.com. You can access them there. Also, please feel free to get any content you want, all about helping businesses, entrepreneurs, athletes, military veterans, everybody take their businesses and their careers to a whole new level. Lots of great content there. But without further delay, jump into this episode. You're going to really enjoy Russ and really what he and the rest of the team over at Front Office Sports are doing. Give it a listen. Enjoy. Welcome to the Make Your Mark podcast. My name is Mark Moyer, and I'm super duper thrilled to have Russ Wilde on. Russ is the co-founder and COO of Front Office Sports, but he does all kinds of different things for them and for others. Great story. Can't wait to hear the rest of it. Russ, where are you right now?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Mark. I'm sitting in my office in Davis, California. That's where I reside, and then I'm back in New York, like sort of 2 weeks of the month. So a lot of back and forth cross country travel, but in Davis, that's where I call home at this point.
Got it. And what is Davis known for?
It is known for UC Davis. They have a very good vet school, which my girlfriend attends, and that's the reason I'm out here. A lot of coffee shops, sort of like a college town feel, but like, with hints of California, which is very different than where I'm from in New Jersey and the New York area. So I like it out here, though. It's been a good 2 years or so.
Wow. And do you find so I spent a year out in Orange County, and I was down in Huntington Beach and Laguna Niguel. And I found that, to me anyway, I was so used to the New York, and I was from Connecticut, but in this area, so used to sort of a faster pace.
Yeah.
And the slow pace really caught me off guard.
Yeah. It definitely took a while to kind of get used to it. Like even just like going to the store, or the one story I kind of tell is like our first, me and my girlfriend, our first like dinner or meal here, we went downtown and people just started like talking to us from like different tables. And I was like, even just the elements of like how people interact here are very different. Like in New Jersey, it's like tunnel vision, looking at who you're eating dinner with. And you wouldn't even think to like go and ask somebody or a question or engage in conversation. But yeah, it's definitely slower. And I think like, I guess friendlier, but it's a little like, you're a little like, what's going on here when you first move out to the West Coast, or at least I was.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because when I was out there, and you're right, everybody's talking to everybody and everybody's super friendly, but you also find that, and I hate to say this for all my West Coast listeners, but it just seemed like some of it was a little bit on the fake side. Like it was just kind of contrived. And in New York, it's harder to break through the skin or whatever it is, the shell. But people are much more genuine. They call it like it is here. Very direct. It's not, hey man, what's happening today? Like, because I don't really care, but I'm asking you anyway out there. Right. I don't know.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Right.
But anyway,
it is what it is. Anyway, so look, I want to talk obviously quite a bit about front office sports, but before we jump into that, I guess I'd love to hear about, you said you were originally from New Jersey, right?
Yep.
How on earth did you end up going down you attended college in Miami? How'd that happen?
Yeah. So I applied to a lot of schools kind of all over the place. And my final sort of like two, I guess, was like Villanova and Miami. And then I had some others sort of in the Northeast. But I mean, I guess my family had always been going to Florida for vacation every year. And so I kind of like, we were on a family trip and my mom was like, oh, like Miami's like an hour or whatever away. Like, let's just go take a trip, see what it is, see what it's like. Stepped on campus, saw all the palm trees, saw the lake, saw all the, everything that Miami had to offer. And I was just kind of like, all right, like I can see myself going to school here. And then sort of like, as we went through the process, I got accepted. And then it was like my mom actually started looking into like sort of like what differences between the schools. And she was like, oh, like Miami has like a sports management program. And I was like, okay, like that sounds cool. I was kind of thinking I might go like poli-sci, but then, I just sort of like, we went down for a final trip and then just to kind of like revisit the school, see what else they sort of had to offer. And then I was sort of like, all right, like, yeah, let's do it. It was like a very, I don't know, it was very like, I don't want to say lackadaisical sort of like reason that I went there or like decision-making process, but I was pretty much like, okay, like this works. Like I didn't like, not much sort of went into it other than that. But yeah, obviously very happy that I went there.
It's interesting that you say that because when you go to a school like that, you're not necessarily walking into a chemistry class and saying, well, right, the academics here are fantastic. You're right. It's very visual. I went to Colgate and I chose Colgate not because it was ranked highly academically. I mean, yes, it's a good school, I guess, but it just so happened that when I went there, it's a beautiful campus and it was like a great, beautiful day and people were throwing Frisbees around and it was like gorgeous. I was like, wow, this is great. And, no one mentioned to me that it was that weather like once a year and
right.
Freezing.
It's funny. The one day I visited Villanova, it was like a rainstorm. And I wonder if it was like, oh, like if it was sunny during that spring day, like would things have changed? But yeah, I think I knew that I always grew up loving sports. I thought I wanted to sort of go to school with like a college sports atmosphere. And I guess just got kind of lucky.
Yeah. Miami would be one with a sports atmosphere. Yes. Just a little bit. So while you were attending school, and we'll talk about what sort of started with front office in a second, but did you attend a lot of the college football, basketball, baseball, those sort of the games, or what were you like?
Yeah. So my first 2 years specifically, I did a lot of work with which was then sort of Learfield and like the sports marketing group of the athletic department, just volunteering, like not working, getting paid or anything like that. But, it was funny. Like my first like sports game at Miami was Miami versus Ohio State, at Hard Rock. And it was like the biggest atmosphere. Like that was the biggest college atmosphere of all my games that I went to in Miami. Was the first one. And I kind of look back and I was like, shit, like I wish I was like there as an attendee, not necessarily volunteering, but it was, I volunteered there for the first 2 years for the most part. And then after that, I sort of like tried to attend as a fan, so to speak. But I was always going to games and, was involved with the athletic department in a volunteer capacity early on. So
walk me through what was the moment you woke up or your co-founders or whoever it was woke up and said, ding, front office sports?
We never thought it would be a business or never like went into it thinking we could turn it into something. Like it was, so Adam White, our CEO, he started it the end of his freshman year because he was going to be, he didn't have time for a full-time internship sort of his summer after his freshman year at UM, and decided a good use of his time would be to interview executives, publish those on a blog. And hopefully by the time he graduated, he'd build up enough sort of relationships to where he'd get a job or internship. And so Adam did like a dozen over the first summer, came back to school, posted in our Facebook group for our sport management program saying like, hey, I got this thing, don't really know what it is or what it's going to be, but it's helping me knock down doors and get on the phone with people that probably have no reason to talk to me. So if anybody wants to help out, give me a shout. And then, so we did that for, from 2015 when I came on, really through Adam's graduation. I'm 2 years older than him, in 2017. And at that point, when he graduated, we sort of saw like that we built up a decent sized audience, and we're like, all right, there's nobody really covering the sports industry that's dedicated to it outside of SBJ, Sports Business Journal. And so we sort of thought like maybe there was a way to have a second publisher, because if you look at like every other industry, there's multiple publishers that cover them. So I would say like when Adam graduated, that was probably when we took like a little bit deeper look at it, and we're like, okay, maybe there's something here. But that was like total infancy. Like when we really, really started to get excited about it was probably 2018, when we started to receive some investor interest and saw like the possibilities if we had some resources behind us.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it's funny that you say that you didn't first go into this thinking it was a business, because I think that's how a lot of things happen, right? A lot of things grow that way when it's just like, hey, I'm having a ton of fun doing this.
Right.
And then it goes, do you by any chance get I get a business newsletter also on a daily basis called Morning Brew. Have you heard of them?
Yep. Yeah, know those guys pretty well.
Oh, well, it's like them. It's like you doing them on sport. I mean, it's very similar styles. It's really easy to read, great humor, great content, and I bet that I'm sure they started a very similar way. I'm guessing. I don't know. Did they or?
I'm not. I think they were more deliberate in trying to turn it into a business right out the gate, I think, as opposed to us. But yeah, I read Morning Brew. I'm a big fan of what they're doing. And I think even our newsletter is like, we look to them sort of for inspiration early on, because we saw like a lot of other companies did newsletters. It was just sort of like their stuff from their website repurposed, whereas we wanted to build like a platform that was completely original. So yeah, but no, we really enjoy what they do and the business that they've built.
Well, that's great. Well, and I'm involved, and I've been involved for way too long with fantasy sports. And I shouldn't even tell you, but I started when you were negative something. I started in, ready for this, 1983.
Wow.
At Colgate. And I still have a letter somewhere from Sports Illustrated. I think it was dated 1984 that said, hey, great to hear your story about it wasn't called Fantasy Sports back then. I think it wasn't even called Rotisserie because it was sort of before those guys, but it was sort of your baseball league or something. And it was funny. They also said, enclosed is $1 to help offset your postage or something. And they actually included $1, which I thought was strange. But anyway, but with the whole fantasy, I mean, obviously now it's an enormous thing. But to your point about most of these sites, they just kind of repurpose the same bland stuff. And this is sort of why I like reading your newsletter. And it's not really fantasy based necessarily, but more so with like, I don't want to say any specific websites like cbssportsline.com or anything, but it's like their newsletter is just like, Bob Jones hit a home run today and plated 3 runs, whatever. And it's just like, yeah, gee, that's pretty inspiring. So that's why I like what you guys talk about. Plus you do touch on a lot of the controversial stuff that goes on these days. Like, for example, what the hell is going to happen with this Kentucky Derby thing?
Yeah, it's I guess like the overall sentiment around it. Like, I think we, each of our platforms we view as separate, and they're just like separate audiences. So it's important to sort of interact with them in each individual way. Our newsletter, I think, is much more sort of, it skews older than our social or our website. And so like folks, who have been in the industry a while, like they know the negative stuff that's going on, even if nobody else is talking about it. So that's why I think we've been able to cover some of those topics. And yeah, I'm sure it'll be interesting to see how everything with this, the Kentucky Derby final sort of shakes out. I saw a few, I think Twin Spires and a few other like betting books were like refunding the, as promotion, we're refunding sort of the bets, but it's always interesting when something like that happens and see who, which betting platform sort of try to get first in front of like all the promotion and all the hype around and hysteria around the finals.
Well, it's interesting. You know what? I thought I was reading something wrong, because it said, Twin Spires was refunding up to $10 per person. And I'm thinking, it's like Planet bet $10, like weren't they all? But then it said something like, up to 6 million was bet. I'm like thinking 6 million. I thought it'd be 6 billion or something. Like, you kid, there's no way it was just 6 million. So I must have been, maybe there was typos in there. I don't know what was going on, but I would have sworn that there was millions and millions and millions of dollars bet on it.
Still, like, such a large percentage of betting is like not through, legitimate, so to speak. So like 6 million is like probably, I mean, I don't want to speculate on numbers, but like there's a lot of like non-legit sort of bets going on. And that's like, I mean, that's a topic in and of itself. Right. And also like, in looking at the space, the coverage of betting in sports, like there's a lot of talk around from, the AGA and some other groups, like all of these media companies now are starting to cover betting, but like they're not necessarily having those disclosures where it's like, if you have a problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER or any of that stuff. So that's the one thing that sort of we're looking at is like how media companies in particular are sort of like positioning themselves in that regard, and what they are disclaiming, or what disclaimers they are putting out, what they're not. So there's it's obviously a hot button topic. I think betting and esports are the two things talked about sort of most among our audiences, like emerging issues or topics in the space.
Oh yeah, well certainly esports, and it's funny because even just maybe 18 months ago, esports was sort of getting a foothold, but I think most people were kind of like, what the hell is this? And not just what the hell is this, but it's unbelievable that people are not just conceptually making some money doing this stuff, but it's going to be enormous. And the idea that people will fill Madison Square Garden watching people playing video games, I think kind of blows some people away. But
I think the one thing too is like, now that it's sort of like, it's not like the first inning of esports, so to speak. Like you're seeing a lot of brands sort of recognizing like it's still, a lot of brands are diving in, and you're seeing now brands sort of looking to those first enterers into the market, or whatever you want to call them. Like, all right, it's working for them. Let's see how we can get into it now. And that's the one thing it comes down to is like any sport or any activity, once there's enough eyeballs, once there's enough sponsorship dollars, like it just opens up the floodgates, and there really is no ceiling for it, because the only ceiling is how many people will watch this stuff, which just seemingly continues to grow, every year, so to speak.
But what do you think? So let me ask you this, it's vying. Look, I'm curious to hear from your perspective, because you're certainly, we'll say, a lot younger than me, and you've got your finger on the pulse of what's going on out there. Do you think that attending a live sports event will start sort of really fading away, and people are going to rely more on whether it's esports or just kind of streaming and watching from even anywhere, like a bar or something or whatever?
Do you mean with esports specifically, or with like all sports?
All sports.
Yeah, I still think I think going to a game is still an experience that people want to have. And I think maybe there's like this area where it's becoming sort of more corporate, or more like upper middle class or whatever. But like I think like the days of, a family of 5 or 6 going to a baseball game, that's obviously a larger size family, but like it costs a lot of money. And so that's where, I think as sports over the years, like the money just keeps increasing in terms of like revenues generated by the teams and leagues. Like it's becoming sort of more corporate and more like, millennials spend money on experiences, right? Like I just went last week to a ball game with a few of my friends. Like, so I don't think that's necessarily going away, but I think what is going to sort of go away is like, you'll have less fans buying tickets for personal use. And it's like, it's no longer, a family of 4 buying season tickets throughout the year. It's Wells Fargo or Morgan Stanley or, a law firm. So that's the one thing that I think is sort of like changing the most. And some teams are trying to obviously implement like, more family friendly packages and more friendly like group ticket sort of options. Even teams like the Oakland A's are doing like a movie pass sort of version where you can buy in for a monthly rate and a standing room only, that sort of stuff. Yeah. So I think it's like, at this point, when I personally go to a ball game, like I know I'm going to spend at least, $100 when I'm there, between parking, between beers, between dinner or whatever. So it's much more like equivalent to like going to a ball game is more equivalent to going just out for a night rather than saying like, hey, I want to watch sports. Like it's much more of like a,
right.
I guess, how do I phrase it? Like, experience, I guess.
Yep.
But anyway, do you like kind of agree there, or is that something that like how do you, when you go to a game, like what is the purpose, or like, is it family versus business?
So, personally, I may bring maybe some business type people with me, but I abhor talking business at a sporting event.
Sure. Yeah.
So I will only bring people that I'm friends with, that maybe I'm affiliated with somehow business wise, but it's, I because I cannot stand when two people are in front of me and they're blabbling away nonstop during the action. And
right.
they're just there because they're there. And so I have an issue with that, but maybe I don't know, maybe I'm a blip on the radar, who knows? But to me, I'm a huge fan. So I love going to Yankees games. I'm a New York Rangers season ticket holder. So I go to a lot of hockey games. I'm here in Midtown Manhattan, so it's easy enough for me to get to, but I agree with your point though, that it is getting to be sort of really tough for an average, I don't want to say an average fan, but a fan that doesn't have the means necessarily to go to lots of games. I mean, you're right. It's expensive. I had to take out a second mortgage to have a second beer. I mean, it's crazy. It's expensive, but I also read in your amazing newsletter that about the plans you talk about, that even the Mets are having that too. I think where they're saying, for $96 a month, come show up in standing room only. And that's actually pretty smart, especially for the fans that don't have to spend too much to get there live nearby, whatever it might be. So I think that's a smart idea, because you often wonder, I think, look, if I look at it, let's say a Royals game where I see that there's 12,000 empty seats, I'm thinking, I bet it could cost me $4 to get in there. That's it. So I would even pay full boat for a ticket.
Yeah. The interesting thing too, that a lot of teams are looking at now is, without getting like too friggin' inside baseball, so to speak, but like, I think the one thing teams look at is like, if somebody just buys a ticket and doesn't show, they lose money. Because if you're in the stands, you're at least going to spend, like every team has like a number that they align to, an individual spending when they go there, whether it's at the, pro shop, or whether they're going to buy a jersey from the team store or whatever it is. And then food also. So like, that's where it actually makes sense oftentimes for teams to like charge these like, $90 a month rates for standing room only, just to get people in the stands, because they're going to buy things in the stadium as well. So there's like that sort of element to where, teams oftentimes sort of like they'll sell season tickets, and, if 10,000, say every season ticket is sold out, there's 10,000 people missing from that stands. I think historically teams have been like, oh, like we sold out, that's good. Whereas now they're getting more intelligent about, it's not just about selling out. It's about making sure every ticket purchased actually has a person showing up in the stadium. So that's something that, like, from a data and analytics side, that, teams are sort of trying to find ways to, put a number on that stuff.
You're absolutely correct. And I'm a great example of that, because I absolutely do go and I spend a ton of money on beer and food. And so it's absolutely right, Russ. And the thing is that also now, and this, I'm quoting stuff that you already know, but the whole idea of analytics it's interesting, because at first maybe old timers kind of like turn up their nose at this stuff. Whether it's in sports specifically, especially baseball, and even hockey now is, football, analytics everywhere. But on top of that, even with stadium behavior of the fans and what the fans actually prefer to eat and drink, and when they do it and where they do it, and if they do it within 20 feet of their seats, or they do it 200, if they're willing to walk 200 feet to get it, it's incredible. But it's interesting that if you think about it, Russ, I'm surprised it took this long to get to this point, honestly.
Yeah. I think like there's a lot of industries out there that, like, I think saying copycat industry is a little harsh, or just has like a negative connotation, but you don't, like, it's tough for organizations like of the magnitude of teams, professional sports teams, to try to like to do things without seeing that it's successful. And like, sports teams are very viable, very big businesses, but they're dwarfed by, Fortune 1000 companies. So it's like, there's a level there where, they want to make sure if they're investing heavily in something, because when sports teams invest, they invest heavily. So it's a matter of sort of like that, inching, crawling before you run, so to speak, of like trying to test things, see what makes sense, see how they can derive value from it, whether it's from sponsorship, from stadium, venue, vendor sales, etc., before really investing heavily. Because, these things are also like stadiums are not redone once a year. Like they're there, they do renovations and stuff. It's not something you could just change overnight. So that sort of like, I think adds to some of that.
Well, the whole concept that even though, as you said, like, for example, a Google or whatever, they're multi-billion dollar companies, but I mean, obviously the sports, even though the entity may not be a big money maker, it's incredible how we are all so wired into, especially
right.
home teams and so forth. And we probably would spend, I don't know, I still think that, let me take a step back. I've noticed that when I help athletes make a transition from when they leave the game and into the business world,
sure.
what's interesting about them is that they are incredibly intimidated by stepping into a room full of people wearing suits, right? And then on the flip side, there's people that wear suits that are incredibly intimidated being around a bunch of athletes, right?
Yep.
But once you actually sort of ease the intimidation or factor, whatever it is, then it's really for everybody to mesh together. And I think the same thing goes with a lot of the people at the teams are not really sure how to incorporate the suits into it. And then the people at the companies aren't sure how to incorporate the sports into it. So once they figure that out, there's a lot of upside, I think. Now, for front office sports, now, look, obviously you're doing really well with the newsletter. At least I think you are. I'm assuming you are, right? You got more than 5 readers?
Yeah, more than 5. We're excited for where we're at. It's been, but yeah, more than 5 readers, luckily. It's funny. That's how I talk about my podcast. When someone says, how big is your audience? I said, well, when I listen to it 4 times, that's 4. Anyway, I don't like to tell anybody. It's nobody's business. Anyway, but with that said, where do you think, what's your, tell me what you can tell me anyway, but where would you love to grow this? Yeah. I think that we see like an opportunity to where, I think now more than ever, both from the athlete perspective, I think, as well as just like the everyday sports fan, there's a heavy interest in sports technology and, athletes that are getting involved in the sports space, or in the investment space or tech space, I should say. So like for us, like, I think that we sort of see ourselves, originally we were like a publication for people that work in the industry. And that was our goal, was if you work in the industry and you read us every day, if we garner the whole industry, that's awesome. But I think now, sort of more than, before, we really see an opportunity to be like that publication at the center of 2 passion points, sports and business. And that not only sort of is of interest to people that work in the industry, but it's also, this concept or persona of like the smart sports fan. And I think that that's, even we just look at like Darren Novell and his audience of like 2 million folks, on Twitter specifically, like if that's the floor, or we're just using that as like a leading indicator for the size of the audience, like we feel pretty good about building like a really scalable sort of media property, and covering things that are like sportsy, businessy, and anything that sort of like, merges the 2 topics. So I think that's sort of what we're after. And we feel like like I said, our floor is sort of the people that work in the industry, but I think there's just such like an untapped market of sports business content, and the audience for that.
Now, do you see yourselves mostly as a sort of a media company? Would you ever consider, for example, sponsoring conferences and that sort of thing, or?
Not our if we're going to sponsor a conference, we'll just kind of do it ourselves. I would think, like, but we view ourselves as a media company, and like, media companies host, they write content, they have newsletter, they build podcasts, they build video, like all that stuff is, within our realm. And then events too. That plays into what we want to do going forward.
And what do you think? I mean, so who are some of the big competitors, or are there really, or what? I mean, because look, I think people, if they start looking at you guys, I mean, look, obviously, they always say, imitation's best flattery, that sort of thing. But who's out there that's gunning for you, do you think?
I think Adam, our CEO, sort of puts it best. He's like, our only competition is ourself and time, because we like, and I guess like in regard to that, without being too flowery, like that's, I think like if you're a media company, you're competing with every other media company. It doesn't matter your topic. You're just competing for people's attention. So like we obviously really believe strongly in our platform. And I think like, whether that's The Athletic, whether it's ESPN, whether that's TechCrunch, whether that's Morning Brew, like every media company is competing for attention. There's only 24 hours in a day. So I think like, we're less competing with like a Forbes or a Sports Business Journal. We're more just competing with like every media company under the sun. Because that's, you can only read or watch so many things throughout the day as an individual.
Well, it's, and you're right. And what's also incredible is that you hit it right on the head there, Russ, because there's just so much out there, so much that how can people stand out? I mean, there's just on television alone, there's so much content. Then you've got, the streaming options. You've got, things you can download, upload. It's insane how much is available. So how, now I think you guys stand out because you're it's not niche, because a little niche. Yeah.
Yeah.
Niche, but a lot in the niche,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even going back to like the eSports thing, like we just compete for people's leisure time. Whether people choose to spend that leisure time reading, playing video games, going out to grab dinner with, their significant other, like we're competing against all of that. So that's like, I think it's an interesting sort of, way that we look at that, I suppose, because it's not, if we know that if we put the best content out there, that's all we can do. And just like how we sort of like market, quote unquote, that content. But at the end of the day, like we're not just competing with other media companies, we're competing with how people spend their time in general.
That's true. The other night, I guess it was late, and I was flipping through and I caught the TV version of TMZ. You ever seen that?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. And I was thinking, what if you guys did that someday? Like you had, the cameras around there, everyone's shooting a breeze, talking about the different things. Is that something you'd ever do?
Yeah. I mean, it's something we definitely like to do. And even like, even looking at like what Kevin Durant and his 35 Ventures have done, with the boardroom, or looking at what LeBron has done with the shop, like there's, I could definitely see some sort of, FOS production that, looks similar to those, or even just like, incorporates certain aspects to where maybe we are on ESPN one day, hopefully. We'll kind of see how that goes. But yeah, I think like, we'd love to anything sort of at the center of sports and business, which, like you said, is niche, but it's also a little broad. Like we want to be at the center of those conversations. And whether that's on our platform, whether that's like a Vice model and we're licensing content, or, basically selling content to other media companies, like we're open to all that stuff. And it's something that gets us really, really excited.
Oh, that's great. So right now, how do you hope to, or how are you growing the audience, or what do you think is one of the smartest ways to do that?
For us, the biggest thing is our newsletter. Cause we feel like that's one of our best products, if not the best product. And it's sort of a way for us to have that one-to-one relationship with our audience, where we literally have like, a delivery platform to them every day. And I think like, tangentially to that, I suppose, like, I think a lot of media companies want to build an app, and like, there's obviously benefits to that from the data perspective and things like that. But like an email is a push notification. Like when one of the main reasons why you build an app alongside the data is the ability to push content to people. And like an email is just that. Everyone has email notifications on their phone.
Sure.
So for us, when we funnel people to our newsletter, typically they stick, and that's a way for us to kind of like keep in their news feed, so to speak, every day, with that platform.
Well, that's keeping them, but how how do you get, when you say the newsletter grows it, but who, like how, like if I said to you, hey, I'd love to grow your audience by X amount of people, would it be me blasting out to my social media empire, whatever it is? Hey, you guys got to check this out. I mean, is that what you rely on, or how's it usually done?
Yeah, I think a lot of people find their way to us through our Twitter account. And so like, you know, we obviously post our own content there, but a lot of it, if you go check that out, it's like, it's a lot of content that is not driving people to our website. It's really just our own marketing, because that, you know, Twitter is the one platform that I, you know, along with, you know, probably Facebook, that like has the ability for things to go viral very quickly. And Twitter is so in real time that like when you have something like Tiger winning the Masters, if we have a rundown of tweets of, you know, whether it's the Tiger's Nike commercial or, you know, a heat map of like Tiger related tweets, like that is our marketing. So we have, that's like from a brand perspective. And then we're able to do, you know, retargeting ads and things like that in order to serve people. You know, advertisements to say, hey, sign up for our newsletter. But that's, you know, our Twitter is like our biggest marketing, because it's our biggest platform, but then also like just the ability for stuff to go viral and get people, you know, into our ecosystem, I guess.
That's awesome. So Russ, you're like, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but you're 20, I'm going to guess 26 ish.
Yes, you're right. I always have to think about that. 26.
Have to think about it.
Look at that.
I still do my, you know, I'm X and a half. I don't know if that's, you know, I'm 8.5. Anyway. So look, obviously there's a long road in front of you, and it's, looks pretty cool. I mean, you know, you're, you know, without saying you're living the dream per se, but you are, because you're working in an industry you love, right? I'm assuming.
Sure. And
you're not, you know, selling medical devices or something.
Sure.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but anyway, but where do you see yourself the next 5-10 years? What would you love to be doing? Yeah.
I've been asked this question a few times on recent podcasts and just conversations. I don't know. We just want to keep building FOS. Like, I think like, I don't necessarily have a lot of time to think about like what I want to do in 5 to 10 years. I think long-term, the one thing that I've always sort of wanted to do is, you know, either go teach or be a professor of some kind, you know, whether it's at a college level or elsewhere. And I think that's something that like being able to help young professionals and students sort of like break into the sports industry is something that like I, you know, maybe not 5 years or 10, maybe like 20, 30 years, that might be something that I find really rewarding. And yeah, I would say like that,
Professor Russ.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But that, yeah. So I think that's like super long-term. Like that's something that I've always sort of had in the back of my mind, you know, and a way to sort of like help the group of, you know, people sort of break into the industry. But yeah, for the next 5 or 10 years, I think FOS will take up a lot of that time.
I would guess. That's awesome. All right. So listen, we're going to pivot now into what I call a hit your mark segment. It's pretty easy, but I'm very curious about this. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah.
Here you go. Who is your favorite athlete?
I would say growing up, it was always Bernie Williams.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. He was always growing up. I don't know why. I think like, I just remember going to Bernie Williams bobblehead day, getting that with like my grandpa and grandma. And I don't know. I just always felt like he wasn't never like somebody's most like, cause you had like the Jeters and,
sure,
you know, Tino Martinez and people that were sort of more like front facing, but I always sort of liked Bernie.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Bernie.
He's a guitar player, so that's always
he is, right? Well, the funny thing about Bernie is that what always bothered me a little bit about him is that I've always had a really good arm, like from the outfield or whatever it is, and it drove me nuts but I never played, you know, and what professionally or anything, and it always drove me crazy to see like a fly ball to him, and he didn't have a good arm at all, and I mean he did everything great. Although we used to joke when I'd watch the games that he'd always be like, "Hey, you get it!" Like instead of "I got it," you got it. But anyway, but he'd catch the ball and like lob it in, or like he couldn't throw anybody out at home or anything, and that drove me bananas. But it's such a pure hitter and clutch and playoffs and everything. And you're right. Because he was such a quiet guy.
Yeah.
everybody else got the headlines really. But a funny story, a few years ago, several years ago, I was at a bar in the city on 33rd and just off 5th called Legends Pub. And we were there just grabbing a beer, lunchtime. Like it was just like almost opening day, a couple days afterwards, hanging out. And then the bartender says, oh, I saw on the TV, it showed like Bernie doing some sort of event or something. And I was like, that's weird. Why is he doing that? And the guy's like, oh, he's right downstairs. I'm like, what? And so he's like, you want to go? I'm like, you mean I can just walk in there? He goes, yeah, well, it was like $150. Like, let's go ahead. So my two buddies and I, we just walked downstairs and then we ended up like getting pictures of the guy and everything. Awesome. Really great. I mean, just a wonderful guy. Great. A lot of fun. But anyway, all right. So that's Bernie. How about today?
Today. That's a good question. I find myself consuming sports less nowadays. I guess I'm more like new age guy. I love A-Rod and what he's done for his brand like over the last 2 or 3 years. And I just think he's really like leaned into a lot of the things that, I think athletes historically, for whatever reasons, haven't necessarily leaned into. Like he rolls with the punches. He knows he's had his faults over the years, but I think he's done a really good job of just like putting his personality first. And I always like, whenever he posts something on Instagram, I always find myself watching it. So he's not active, but I think he's in the spotlight a little more nowadays. So that's, I find myself enjoying A-Rod and what he's done.
Well, you know what's interesting is he's almost pulled a Tiger where while he was playing, people kind of thought he was a jerk a little bit, this and that. And now I think people genuinely, for the most part, like him because he's a lot about giving advice. Like, he's very good about giving advice, like baseball related, but maybe he'll get some other stuff. But he seems like he's really turned that corner. I mean, the same with Tiger. Tiger was an absolute whatever beforehand, but now he seems to be like he's lightened up a little bit and so on.
Right.
Masters doesn't matter, but
he's got a good PR guy who's a fellow Miami guy, Ron Berkowitz. So he's had a little bit to do with that and it's turn around.
Yeah. What very few people know is that he's got apparently one of the largest art collections on the planet. I haven't been invited to his house yet.
One day,
soon enough. And if you had a chance to invite 3 people to dinner, alive or dead, that are not sports related, who would they be?
Ooh, I've heard people ask this question. I've never been asked it myself. I think Michael Jordan. I grew up a Bulls fan.
Not sports related. Come on, no sports.
Oh, not sports related. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's all right.
Not sports related. I would say, probably Obama won just because like I think he would be interesting and just like, I think he just would bring like a lot of interesting conversations with people. Who else not sports related? This is a tough one, Mark. I'm trying to think.
About time.
I'm honestly stuck.
All right, let me help you out with it. Here we go.
I want to say who do you?
Any actors, actresses, any politicians, any historical figures, Abraham Lincoln, I don't know.
I would say Will Smith. Growing up, he was always one of my favorite actors. And to talk about Men in Black, I'm sure we can talk about that for a few hours. And then who's like a really sort of intellectual sort of person?
Well, you want Elon Musk? I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. That'd be an eccentric sort of group. I'd go with Elon just to sort of see what he has to say about. I think the conversation with him and Will Smith would be very different, but that would be an interesting sort of group. I'll take that.
Yeah, that would be fun. It's funny because when I get all kinds of crazy answers. Like for example, one guy. Quick funny story. One of my guests, we had recorded the entire episode, and he had said at the end, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and MLK, Martin Luther King, and then. I discovered at the end of the episode, and this is going back several months, but I had actually forgotten to hit record. So we had this amazing episode. It was off in thin air. So I sort of said to him, listen, oh man, I feel so bad, but do you mind? Let's do it again. He goes, no, that's cool. We'll do it again. But when I got to the point where I said the 3 people, I said to him, who are you 3 people? And then I said, most people say guys like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, or MLK. who are your three? And he's like, oh, but then he rebounded quick and he was like Jimi Hendrix. I forgot whatever they were, but it was funny when I did that. But yeah, I would love to. I mean, there's so many, it's cheating because I ask the question all the time. So I guess I always think who I'd say, but like to me, George Washington, like having a beer with that guy, that'd be pretty cool. Maybe having a glass of wine. I guess you'd have to glass of wine with Jesus Christ or something. I think that'd probably be pretty interesting. And I'd love to hang out with Paul McCartney too. But there you go. That's me. Well, listen. Looping back around, what's the best way for people to, number one, I mean, look, if they want to spend lots of money on FOS and advertise with you guys and so forth, how do they get a hold of you guys? Yeah.
So our entire team is on Twitter, all day long. So at Front Office Sport, at Russ Wilde Jr., FOS Adam is Adam. And so that's an easy way. LinkedIn, anywhere, any social platform, we're all pretty active on from our team standpoint. And then, just email Russ at frontofficesport.com. Same as our URL, obviously, without the O. That sometimes gets some people confused. But that's sort of how we go about things.
And some people, if they've got some incredible scoop on stuff and they don't want to tell anybody else, so they want to tell you, same way, right?
Yeah, same exact way.
Of course, definitely. Well, look, I really appreciate your time today, Russell. I'm sorry. Didn't want to sound like your mom. Russ, sorry.
There you go.
But look, thanks for your time. I'm a big fan. I've been reading it for quite a while now. I used to be involved with another sports company that really had things sort of tied in with this a little bit. I'll tell you about that later. And but also, I'm excited to see how things develop because I think that you guys seem to have, anyway, from my perspective, your fingers on the pulse of sort of a lot of things that are going on, because we can't, as consumers of information, can't necessarily be on top of all the different things going on. And so it's interesting to read about eSports and also read about the business side of things and read about the sports side of things and media and everything. So I like what you're doing. Keep up the great work that you're doing. And I appreciate you being on.
No, thanks, Mark. Appreciate it as always.
Thanks so much for joining us today on this episode of Make Your Mark podcast. The goal of the podcast is to help you find ways to make your mark, to succeed in life, and to jump past your competition. Be sure to leave me a review on iTunes and Stitcher, and subscribe to be the first to hear new episodes. If you're looking for ways to make your mark, send me an email, mark@markmoyer.com, and I'll get back to you right away. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.